Evolutionary Hardcore 2.0. This is a special number 100 episode. So in this one, look, we're going to talk about the history and our favorite episodes. This is going to be a really good one. We're marking the 100 episode, basically the anniversary of this podcast. And look, it's going to be really, really a good one. Mobster and I, we're going to go over how it got started, how this podcast got started. We're going to talk about the objective of the podcast, what we're trying to do here. If you're a new listener or you've been listening to all our podcasts, we're going to kind of, go over what our objective is so you understand what we're trying to do here. It's very unique and different than what other podcasts out there are doing. We're going to talk about our favorite episodes over the past 100 episodes, which ones we kind of went over that were really special. We're going to talk about the aims for the future of the podcast. And we're going to also talk, thank all of you listening and the people who made this show possible, including the sponsor and all that. So we're doing a really, really fun episode here. This is going to be a fun one, especially if you followed us over the past few years on these podcasts. So let's talk about first how it got started a little bit. So, look, at the bottom line is just like your favorite TV shows. Okay, you have a series, and the characters, in the TV show, they die, or they move on, or they change the actor or actress, and that's what happens with these podcasts over time. I've been on the podcast since day one, but I've had different co-hosts over the years. And one of the things that you learn when you're working with someone, especially in the bodybuilding industry, and I'll bring in Mobster to talk about this too, because he's worked with people, is that people can be difficult to work with. Okay, so it's not easy putting together a show and doing these podcasts with a co-host. It's not easy putting together a show and having guests from the bodybuilding industry. The amount of flakiness that we've had to deal with over the years when we've had guests on the prior podcasts has been, an issue. Having them show up on time, having them come on and not just spend the whole show marketing their products, which a lot of these guys do. A lot of these guys, they have that grifting type of mentality. So the bodybuilding industry, look, it's one of the things that I hate about our industry is that sort of thing. And so it's been very difficult. Sometimes it's difficult doing these podcasts where you have guests that come on and they basically want to shake down your listeners for money. And that's not what we're all about on this podcast. So over time, we've evolved the podcast, and these hardcore episodes, look, we don't bring on guests very often on these hardcore episodes. And one of the things that Mobster and I do, Mobster, he's always on time. I'm always on time. So we have a really good relationship when it comes to that. And Mobster and I, we get into it sometimes. We have disagreements off air about, the direction of the podcast, or we'll have a disagreement over something, that's going to be on the show, but we handle it. We handle it and we move on. And there's been a couple, I can't even remember what we were arguing about, Mobster, but we've had a couple times we've kind of went after each other. And then, we're like, Mobster's like, chill out, Steve, and that's it. And we moved on. And that's how it is on this podcast. And another thing too, that people have to realize too, is the time zone difference. Because Mobster lives on the other side of the pond, we have a big time zone difference. So I'm having to wake up really early. This is literally the first thing I do in the morning is this podcast. So I have all this baby batter that needs to come out. Mobster's a little more chill. He's usually doing this podcast after
the gym, man. I'm relaxed.
After the gym. So he's more calm. So I come off a little more hot and heavy, and he comes off a little more calm for that reason. So I usually like to go to the gym more in the middle of the day or after my regular job in the evening. So I'm usually by the time I hit the gym, I'm like tired. And Mobster's got all this energy that he gets out, for the gym. So, but we have a really good relationship. And on this hardcore episode, it's been Mobster and I on all 100 of these hardcore episodes. It's been Mobster and I, and we've had a really good synergy going. And this is why we've been able to grow these podcasts. And we're at 100 on the hardcore episode. We're at like over, it's like 700 on the other, on a regular episode. And we
Yeah.
have an Iron Overload podcast as well that we're also.
Between the two of us, Steve, I think you and I are anywhere, and I didn't do all of the 500 something shows that we've done on one of the other thing, but I was trying to work this out the other day, thinking about this particular show, and I think you and I have actually, this is fucked up, we've done 700 shows, there or thereabouts, plus the other several hundred that you've done before I became involved. Yeah. And just a sheer amount of time. We average listeners, we average probably 3 to 4 shows per week of the different 4 shows that we do every week for the last 6 or 7 years. So yeah, it's about 6, 7.
So let me just touch on this, and I'll let you kind of take over the rest of this segment, Mobster. But the way that we came together, Mobster and I, was kind of by chance. Mobster, so the story is Mobster went on a couple of different podcasts, and he did really good. Mobster's really, really good on these podcasts. He can talk your ear off. And believe me, well, I mean, Mobster will talk my ear off. I'm not a social person at all, but Mobster's the complete opposite. That's really good. And that's one of the reasons we have good synergy. And it's the same thing when you're dating someone and you're not a social person. It's sometimes better to date someone who is, because they can kind of run the conversation and be the mouth in the relationship. So that's what it is. Mobster and I, he's the mouth in the relationship. So we kind of have good synergy when it comes to that. But he really, showed himself off on some other podcasts. And kind of that's why, we brought him on the podcast as a trial to see how he would do on some episodes, and on some pilot episodes, and he really blew it out of the park. So after that, look, the sponsors were like, we want Mobster. We want to hear more from Mobster. They have good synergy. Let's bring them on. And our producers and our director of the podcast also, they're like, man, Mobster's doing really well. And that's how basically it started. And it started out with a few episodes just to see how Mobster would do, and it kind of took off from there. And like Mobster said, 700 episodes, it's mind-boggling how many we've done, but it adds up over time. And he's done a great job on these podcasts. Go ahead.
I mean, one of the things that Steve and I actually spoke about, I think when we were very first starting to do this stuff, as I said, I'm reminded of, bearing in mind I'm not American, I'm reminded of and if you've seen this actually in comedy movies and movies, Steve, where you have the two commentators at an American football game, and one always plays a bit of an idiot, and the other one, so they're always he always asks these buddy questions. What do you think of that touchdown just there, Joe? And George. Listen, they both know the fucking answers, Steve, but one asks the questions, one answers the questions. And there's always that little bit. They've both got levels of expertise. Sometimes they're ex-jocks and whatever else, right? So Steve, and I'm catching up a little bit, but Steve is way more of a quote-unquote PED expert than I am. I have to refresh my memory. I have to go and look at certain particular things. Yes, as we do more shows, I get more into it, and I remember stuff that Steve said. So I've even turned around and said that some shows we've done, I specifically learned something on that show, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely yin and yang. And arguably, Steve, we shouldn't always agree, because then it would be a very boring show. If we completely agreed, or if we both completely understood the subject, we'd be like, well, you know what I'm talking about, Steve. Yeah, Mobster, it'd be no good. The listener needs to have that energy come from us, the back and forth, the yin and the yang. They're not always agreeing. Well, actually, I would take a different approach, Steve. That kind of vibe, right? So something else. And the reason why I got asked to do podcasts just for my specific niche expertise, my knowledge of the supplement, because I'd owned a supplement company before, to the point where I become a supplement moderator on one of the bigger UK forums, even though I was arguably biased because I had my own company, but because they knew that when I was online, I wouldn't bang the drum too loudly about my own company, but I could talk about the industry in general. I got to write an expose doing that, and I've actually used that in my kind of like CV that got me invited over to Evo. And then later on, of course, I was asked to do, especially during COVID, Steve, I did a few shows then, early 2019, I believe. There's a couple of shows around that time, maybe a little bit earlier, where they were literally, there was nothing going on. You couldn't go to the gyms. So some of my buddies wanted to do something else just to keep their brains working and the juices going, so to speak, about the sport and the industry as a whole. And so I was invited to come on. By that point, of course, I've been training for a very long period of time, 38, 39, nearly 40 years. I'd promoted competitions. I'd competed to a high level. I'd written articles. I'd been interviewed for articles, again, just about the grip stuff and so on and so forth. And the number one thing that comes out of that, and this is something that people sometimes forget in bodybuilding, in weightlifting, or whatever else, is you can be, in any sport indeed, Steve, you can be an absolute phenom. And I mean, the fucking best in the fucking world at what you do. But the moment some motherfucker puts a microphone in front of you, you're like, and the words won't come out. 1-to-1, fantastic. Microphone, speaking to a bigger crowd, bigger audience, they freeze. Or they're perfectly capable of talking about the subject, but that is it. How they kick a ball, the boot they wear to kick the ball, which way the wind's blowing to make the ball go off the end of their foot. But that's it. They can't talk about their misses, their kids, their cars, their passions, and so on and so forth. And so there's an argument to be made for these particular things. We've had guests on and we've done interviews. I think Noah, when we did an interview on one of the other shows that you and I did, Steve, and Milo from PSL we had on. And Milo, once he got warmed up, I think we could have done a 2-hour show with Milo. We could have probably done an hour and a half with Noah. And so the only thing I did there was keep us on topic. That's unusual, again, as Steve says, for me to be able to talk, as we say here in the UK, the hind legs off a donkey. I actually had to pull them guys back onto the subject and know that we had the clock ticking. And that's something else. Literally the ability to fill an hour where maybe we could only talk for 45 minutes back and forth. The ability to, for example, when we've got stuck, we don't mind pausing, going away, taking a minute, get refreshed, have a cup of coffee, come back, finish the show, to make sure that there's a certain level of energy to the show. Steve and I have tuned in to the point where we know, especially if I do a little bit of a motivational, come on guys, we're there for you, we want you to kick ass in the gym, etc. kind of talk at the end of the show, talk about sponsors properly, talk about products properly. We know when we've done well. There's been shows, especially a few of the earlier ones, Steve, and the odd one now and again where I think, we should almost had another go at that one. I think we could have brought more energy to it. Steve and I could have done a little tiny bit better. It's good, but it's not great. It's and something silly Steve and I talked about right in the early shows, for example, was making them timeless. I occasionally make reference to the dates, but we try to make the information that we put into these shows something that you can refer to 5, 10, 15 years down the road, like a reference source. And at the same time, our passion should come across. Steve says about being social, antisocial. I'm the kind of person, this is how fucked up this is, Steve. I probably spend a great and vast majority of my day on my own. But when I'm out and about walking, getting my steps in, down doing the nature photographs, etc., we'll always say hello to the locals. And people will ask me about the photographs and what I'm taking pictures of and the actual nature and the knowledge that I picked up as I go along. And the same thing in the gym. I'd probably say hello to you if I met you in the supermarket car park, but I probably spend 18, 19 hours a day on my own, quite solo. So I overcompensate. I make up for that talking to the cats, getting shit done around the house, chilling the fuck out, doing work on the forums, etc. by overcompensating, being able to put that energy into my talking, into my conversations when I am being sociable. Not one for necessarily going down the bars and pubs and whatever else and parties, probably pick that up from my dad. But equally, once I'm out in those situations, perfectly fine. Say hello to every motherfucker, see what the fuck's going on in your life, etc., etc. So that energy gets put into these shows. The energy gets put into the stuff that I do at the gym and passing on knowledge. Some of the energy gets put across online. One of the things we've actually spoke about, Steve, and something else that occurs to me, not only is some top professional athletes in the world unable to communicate, and sometimes they need a good interview to do that. The other element is, and there's some fantastic, I can think of one or two fantastically informative educational shows which don't have big audiences simply because the passion that individual had to learn the information that they had doesn't come across. It can be quite dry. You can have an absolute expert lecturer, top professor, more degrees and masters, etc. You can take a fucking stick at. But they can be borderline autistic, Steve, when it comes to actually talking to you about the subject. I'm thinking, for example, of some of the stuff in physics, which could arguably change the way that we think about the universe. But if the person that's come across and built this subject up and has become the person that you can refer to can't explain that to you, can't get it across to you, even in relatively simple terms, then they and one or two other individuals are going to know about that subject, and the rest of us, with stuff that could arguably change our concepts on the universe, won't understand what's being talked about. It won't come across. For example, if you could be the best politician of all time, but be unable to make a speech. And the best politician of all time in terms of what you think the direction a country could go in, but you're unable to communicate that to the people that are working beneath you, then how the fuck is the thing that you want to do gonna happen? How are you gonna get the country to turn around? How are you gonna get the economy to kickstart if you can't motivate every motherfucker beneath you, including the people that are paying their taxes and voted you into power? So you need that little bit of an element of salesman. You need that little bit of an element of, okay, even silly things like understanding that without us, and people sometimes have commented on this, we have to have sponsors for these shows to take place, and we must appreciate that we have sponsors for those shows to take place. And so therefore, I've actually seen someone say, are you always mentioning that the company that's sponsoring? Yeah, what a surprise, Steve. We have to do that. And Steve and I understand the need for the sponsors to exist in order for the shows to take place. Literally just for hosting fees and putting stuff online, for creating the graphics that go on the show that the bosses do for us, the production team that Sue talks about, the people that are working with the algorithms, all of those people that never appear on these shows ever are important to what we do, and we understand that they're important to what we do. So it's the same thing with those two Joes talking about the football match all over again. There are advertisers around the pitch, or the people that are paying for the teams to play. The broadcasters themselves are being paid for by a TV company. You know that you're going to have adverts coming up in a minute. Let's pay for the show to take place, and they understand every single aspect of that. And they've got people that are telling them about that all the time, and then they still need to be able to talk when the camera goes live, when the microphone goes live. So that kind of stuff goes in. And I think the other thing, Steve, when we talk about the hardcore shows themselves, there's certain shows that we do which have proved popular. There's certain things where we have to sort of understand what that means. So I'm going to move on to that thing now. So we talk about hardcore shows. Some of our biggest hits in terms of sheer numbers of what people have watched and still quite popular would be the ones where we talk about particular athletes. It doesn't have to be bodybuilders, although it normally is. It's certainly going to be a bodybuilder of renown, whether that's now or in the past. What did Larry Wills do? What do we think Ronnie Coleman did? And so on and so forth. And there's always been a fascination in the sport, especially when the magazines existed. And now with social media, companies like Generation 9 still do this. Plenty of shows and podcasts that there's certainly lots of Instagram posts will tell you the news. And people are fascinated by the idea of what a professional, specifically professional bodybuilder does in order to become a professional bodybuilder. And even if they really understand, the simple fact is that you could take the same drugs as Joe Blow, who just won the Mr. Olympic, and you would not look like Joe. It's still a popular subject. And so not only we talk about the PEDs that we think they use and how the knowledge that we have specifically from pros that have actually talked about what they've taken in interviews that have been done, blood tests, post-mortems, etc., all that kind of stuff. So we got a pretty good idea. There are also other experts in the industry who specifically advise professionals at that level, and then they'll talk in general terms of what pros do. So do we. That stuff, for whatever reason, Steve, just gets traction. So the simple fact that we can talk about the latest Mr. Olympia, the fact that they've gone from, in his case, and I'm thinking specifically of Derek Lunsford as I say this, from 212 class to the open class and then one, that's never been done before. the fact that he's an absolute fucking freak, was almost holding himself back. So he probably took less when he was 212. He probably takes more now in the name of Jesus, as I've just literally watched the show before this. So the religious aspect too. And at the same time allows this stuff, his psyche, to get into that particular place. And you go, what is it that Derek does? What is it that any of these people are doing? That's held a fascination. The same thing with professional athletes in pro American football, MMA, and so on and so forth. The drive, the motivation, our own small way that we've driven and motivated ourselves, and then blow that up into the kind of level that we'd imagine someone that maybe wants to be a top star in a movie or top athlete on the field, the desire to become el numero uno, the best athlete, the best film actor in the world, and what they would do to get into shape, what they do to become a muscular fucking freak on the screen or on the pitch or in the cage or whatever else. And being able to touch upon that sort of drive and being able to put that across to the listener is fun. It's fun for us. And it juices us up. It should excite us. If I can learn what a top professional does, and if I can apply that to me, back when I competed or even now, and if I can let that get me juicy, get me inspired, and if a little element of that comes across when we're talking to the listener, so much for the fucking better. So you don't have to do every single drug that Joe Blow did to become Mr. Olympia, but you can learn about why he might have made particular choices. You can learn that much further down the road what might be required to be in Mr. Olympia, where you're here at this point. So this is what you can kind of do. And if you ever get to that point, these things might be necessary. And that might juice you up, so to speak, and get you to go to the gym and kick ass and take names and make you push the bar harder and squeeze your muscles just like a pro and take a pro approach to your nutrition and a pro approach to your recovery and so on and so forth, and improve your game, even if all it does is just get you a little bit more motivated and excited. And here's the thing, some of the listeners we know, Steve, doing cardio, they're on the bike, they're driving to the gym, getting ready to do cardio, ready to hit the weights, and they like to listen to our shows while they're doing cardio. They like to listen to our shows when they're going to the gym, because some of those shows are going to make them go, right, motherfucker, I'm going to do 3 raw reps of those bastards that I just listened to. They made me fucking want to get to the gym and absolutely fucking hit it. They make me want to train like the Mr. Olympia. They make me want to train like that MMA cage fighter that's just kicked ass. They maybe want to go down and do those things. And that's part of what we do as well. So there's part education, part inspiration, and part entertainment. It has to have that magic combination. What you do see, even amongst top professionals, is there's nearly always one, if they do the group shows, which I kind of like, Steve, when you have like a quote unquote round table, they don't even have to sit in the same room anymore, of course, is at least one of those will host a show and he will try to lead the show. If the guys start arguing, you'll bring them back and remind them they've got more in common than they disagree on. You're fine to disagree, guys. We love your passion, but let's not fucking have you screaming at each other and walking off and not coming back and all that kind of stuff, because you're all in the industry. You're all 30-year veterans. You've all got information, and it'd be a shame to lose you. So sometimes you have someone drags them back on subject. And again, there's an element of that with Steve and I. We've even stopped the show, reset in terms of we think we were going down a bit of a rabbit hole. It's getting a bit dark. Let's have a minute, because we know why we do these shows. This is the reason why we're both here. And then we get back into it with that positive energy. And I think there's a big element, Steve, for what we do. The positivity, the positive energy is super, super important for us. It's,
Yeah, so let me touch on one episode that I really, and then on the next segment, we'll talk about the objective of the Evo Hardcore podcast. So one of the episodes, look, it's not the most popular one at all. It didn't get a lot of views, and I understand, but it's a very important one, and that's the Evo Hardcore 2.0 episode 94, and it's the one we did about blood work. And blood work, look, this episode can literally save your life, and it'll educate you on what you should be looking for in your blood work. Because look, when we use anabolic steroids, I'm telling you, if you have existing issues, anabolic steroids are going to make those existing issues worse. So even if you're never used anabolic steroids before, getting blood work done is important. And once you start using anabolic steroids, blood work becomes even more important, because you got to understand, when you use anabolic steroids, they increase red blood cell count, hematocrit. Okay, no matter how healthy you think you are, even with me, I'm very, very healthy, right? But when it comes to my blood work, because I'm cycling steroids, my blood work comes in hot when it comes to red blood cell count, hematocrit. That's the whole point of using anabolic steroids. Our red blood cell count. That's why they used to, back in the day, endurance athletes used to blood dope. And they used to blood dope. They used to basically extract blood and then put it back into them before their race because they wanted high red blood cell count. They wanted that boost in their performance. So that's why we use it. That's why they're performance enhancers. So that's going to happen. It's going to thicken your blood. You got to be aware of that. So you've got to take the precautions necessary, whether it be coming off gear for a longer period of time, whether it be donating blood. You may have to go donate blood at a special place, not just donate blood, but go to a special place and let them take even more, a pint of blood, so that you get that number back down. And this way your blood doesn't get thick. What's going to happen over time too, because of the volume of food that bodybuilders are eating. And we burn a lot of calories through our workouts, and we take in more food than the average person in a lot of cases. And what ends up happening is the more food you take in, the more damage you're going to do to your body, even if you're eating as clean of a diet as possible. So, you got to think long term about this. What are you going to do when you get into your 50s and 60s? Do you want to end up having heart problems? Do you want to end up having kidney problems or liver problems? So that to me is an important podcast that we did, Mobster. And a lot of people, it's definitely an underrated episode. Another episode too is the episode 90 that we did, Mobster. And episode 90 was a good one too. I really like it because we talked about the difference between DECA and equipoise. And a lot of people don't realize, how similar they are, but also how different they are. But at the end of the day, if you run both, you can end up getting good, clean, long-term keepable muscle. And I think that's a good one too for a lot of you out there. And that was actually one of our more popular episodes, Mobster. Actually had a lot of views. And I think one of the reasons it got a lot of views is a lot of people like these steroids, but there's
Yeah.
also a lot of misinformation about these two steroids, that people like to put down those steroids. They're like, oh, DECA's no good. DECA's only for guys who want to get big and sloppy, or DECA causes DECA dick. And then equipoise, oh, it's a vet steroid. Equipoise is no good. It causes your red blood cell count to go up, so it's not good. Every anabolic steroid causes red blood cell count to go up. So you don't have to be scared of using them. And in fact, they're two of the most safe steroids out there. They're two of the least side effect steroids out there. So you don't have to be scared of using them. So I think that was another important episode as well, Mobster, that episode 90.
One that sprung to mind that I made a note of on my show notes, Steve, was we did a tribute to Monstro, which was episode 68. And that would be the mate Marco Louis, as he was more properly known, went by the name of Monstro online pretty much everywhere and called himself Monstro sometimes, bless him, in the third person. As in, Monstro says, no, you say, you don't use your own name or even your own nickname. That'd be kind of crazy, even referring to myself like Monstro has said. It would be kind of weird. There was an element of, and especially when I first started to talk to Monstro online, a little bit of a back and forth in terms of, Monstro, perhaps you shouldn't be saying these things because it's the information that's applicable to you is not necessarily applicable to the average Joe that's on their forums just wanting a better chest or better arms. He doesn't want to take 5 grams a week and become perhaps a Masters Mr. Olympia or something. And yet I also grew to realize that Monstro had done incredibly well some of the stuff that I'd done, but to another degree again, in terms of the stuff that he'd done at expos and videos. He'd got Mr. Jay Cutler was one person he had on camera, Steve. He did his little 2 and 3 minute videos where he'd introduce a Mr. Olympia or a high ranking bodybuilder. And of course, he was muscular enough to be taken seriously. He was professional enough, even with the Portuguese/English translation type thing going on, and yet at the same time respected enough and did it professionally enough that he was able to hold his. I think he had Derek's Lunsford on one of the things, and he even said something to the effect of Derek will win the Mr. O on that particular video. So he had a 20-foot banner at one expo, worked for a few companies over the years, Steve, etc., and was happy, take his shirt off and walk up and down the escalators as one classic video of his. So you start to realize that the man had a passion. You started to realize that when it came to the expos, he was incredibly professional. The only issue, perhaps, and of course we touched on this on that show, was we don't want our buddies, people that we've become to admire and respect in certain particular ways, and as much for their passion as anything else, to die. And did what he did, doing in terms of the sheer number of grams that he was taking per week, shorten his life? Probably. Was he a super passionate, dedicated professional driven to do what he does? Absolutely. So there was a dedication to him and a little bit of a red flag warning for some listeners. And the same thing when we do the professional shows. There's an argument to be made, but by virtue of the very name, the Hardcore 2.0, versus perhaps shows that were done in the past and some of the other shows that we do. So they need to be a little bit more hardcore, meaning a little bit more edgy, a little bit more, this is what we've heard, this is what we know people do, out there, kind of on the fucking leading edge of stupidity, perhaps. What the really, truly driven individual that wants to be the absolute top in the game, what would they do to become that level of athlete, whether it's blood doping, whether it's high levels of growth, insulin, peptides, and so on and so forth, and not run away from it. We do sort of still advise this is for entertainment. We do still want the listener to perhaps take a more meaningful, sensible, slower down approach. But at the same time, we understand there's a level of entertainment to it. And of course, it's giving you information that's out there. This is what crazy motherfuckers that want to be the absolute best in the world would do. I mean, Steve, people talk about the whole steroid thing all the time in the media, but it's just as fucking dangerous, in fact, more so. Some of the things that get people's attention, the Red Bull type stuff, diving out of planes, and I think using one was sponsored by Red Bull without a fucking parachute, and then lands in what amounts to a giant fucking trampoline hundreds of feet across after having fallen 5,000-10,000 feet. Flying an airplane down a fucking tunnel with 6 inches of wing space on each side, and you could die in an instant. Skiing down the side of a mountain and doing what looks like 100-foot drop. Some of the motorbike type stuff, racing cars doing 260 miles an hour. I'm old enough to remember some of the terrible car crashes. So athletes have always risked things. So some shows will, especially the news, for example, might talk about a terrible car crash back in the day as an absolute disaster. But there's a macabre interest in there. So our hardcore shows are a little bit like that. They're a little bit out there in terms of the information, but it's telling you what people that are the top leading edge will do. So yeah.
So another popular show that we did that got a lot of views was episode 47. And this is where we talked about shredding down with Anavar and Masteron. So very, very important, because a lot of people out there, you dream of having that beach body look. You dream of walking down the beach and having people looking at you and having that, they say, man, that guy works out, and I enjoy that because, I like going to the beach, taking my shirt off and walking down the beach and having all the chicks and even the guys like looking at me and like, damn, that dude, he's ripped, he's got like a 6-pack, he works out, and, and that's important, it's a lot easier now, to look different because of the obesity epidemic in America, and everybody is overweight, and we can't put the fork down, and we've been we've gotten to the point where it gets hard to have that 6-pack. So if you can accomplish a 6-pack and you're over 40, I mean, that's great. Either that means you're a meth head, or it means that you really, really care about your body and you're fueling it properly and you're working out and you're healthy and you look fantastic. So that to me is an important podcast. A lot of people check that one out too, because everybody wants that body.
Yes, that's the thing, Steve. I think the subject matter sometimes is, there's a hint of, when I say about what pros do and what top athletes do, our listeners the dream is to be a pro, and to dream to be a top athlete. The dream would be to have that, oh my God, look at that guy's physique as he walks down the beach, various men or women. There's almost memes out there, guys, now that a man is more likely to come up to you and he would understand because he's trained the work you've done and whatever else. And so anything we can do inspiring the listener to want to get into that shape is fantastic. If we say that we have this amount of listeners, Stephen, 3% achieve their dreams, we're doing quite well. If we get 5% or 10% leaner, If we make every single person, this is just a today's show, want to go to the gym and smash the fucking granny out of the weights because we G'd them up, because we excited them. That's amazing that we can have that kind of impact. There's almost an element of one more ton of weights got lifted by Joe because Joe listened to episode 99. That would be fucking amazing. He literally went in there and did more leg work than he's ever done before because Stephen Mobster fucking made me want to go to the gym and do more leg work. That's amazing. The idea that we can do stuff like that, whether it's informative stuff, juicing you up in terms of just a social type information, whether it's literally these are the things that you need to be doing on cycle, these are the ways that you can protect yourself with your health. This is going to allow you to go out and push things harder because you know that your health's good, because you've done your blood work. These are the kind of amounts that you should be using in the Anavar episode, and so on and so forth, and how long you should stay on. And the awareness sometimes, for example, Steve, you and I have done shows where we talk about what it feels like to be doing those things, because that's important. It's super, super easy. We could do a 5-minute episode, take this many milligrams of Anavar, take these many milligrams of EHU. This is what you do. I'll see you in 12 weeks. No, what are we doing? This is what you're going to feel like. This is kind of stuff that you don't hear in these other shows. For example, the sensation of how you're going to feel walking to the gym when you are quote unquote juiced up to the gills. I mean, I'm exaggerating for the purpose of illustration, but what it feels like to be on testosterone, what it feels like to be stronger, what it feels like to be more muscular, and especially as those things start to happen, as the training and the nutrition, the rest of the recovery, and specifically the PEDs all start to come together. They have that synergistic effect, and you're 8 weeks in on a 12-week cycle. Oh my God, look at me in the mirror. Oh, wow. There's those motherfucking abs. In 3 or 4 weeks' time, I'm going to look so fucking good. Hey, Bob, I can see your abs popping through your t-shirt. Yeah, they never said this on that other show. Mobster and Steve said this is the fucking shit that's going to happen. This is great. It feels fucking amazing, Steve. And that kind of vibe. People coming up to you, what's that? Free weights, free plates each side of the bar. Someone's getting strong. That kind of stuff. The things that we come almost joke about, but that's the sort of stuff that starts to come across in our shows where we talk about personal experience, the way that people have mentored us. We've done a show, I think, Steve, where you and I talked about people that had helped us in the gym. A buddy of yours back in the day helping you with a bench press that enabled your bench press to get to the next level, that kind of thing. And that's what you and I try to do with these shows as well.
Yeah. So let's get more into that. Let's talk about the objective of the Hardcore podcast and kind of our, how we kind of got into it. So look, the reason this show even exists, we're not here to preach, and here's why. Here's the things I've learned over the years. Preaching and ranting doesn't work. How many times, I don't know if this happens in Britain, Mobster, but in America, depending on the neighborhood you live in, like if it's not a private neighborhood, but people come knock on your door and they try to convert you to their ideology or their religion or whatever. I don't know if that's even legal in Britain, but here they do that all the time. And look, how many people they'll knock on 1,000 doors in a day. How many people you think out of those 1,000 actually get converted? Probably none. They might get one person, over the course of a month. Okay. Because people don't look, that's not the way to educate someone. That's not the way, you don't go up to them and start preaching to them to try to convert them to believe. That's not, it doesn't work. Nobody wants to be preached to, especially in America, because we've been kind of, told growing up, oh, it's the land of the free, blah, blah, blah. So you have your own beliefs. So here's the thing, here's the thing I've noticed. When you educate people, you give them the facts, you give them the anecdotal information, you give them your history, because I want to know that. If someone if I'm trying to get stronger and Mobster's 60 years old, I want to know, Mobster, when did you start working out? What was your training program for you to gain strength? You didn't just wake up at 18 years old and be able to, squat, 700-800 pounds or this insane amount and bench press 450 pounds overnight. You had to work. It took something. So I want to know your history. I want to know what you did over time. I don't want you to rant to me and rave about, oh, you got to get in the gym and you got to kill it. That's how you get that. I want the facts. I want to know your history. And I want to know
practical stuff.
So
practical stuff.
And things evolve over time. What Mobster was
Yes.
doing at 20 is not what he's going to do
You
today.
God, no.
Yeah. So here's the thing: you got to be flexible in your fitness ideology, and that's a lot of people don't do that, and they don't do that, and nobody listens to those people when they're online and they're doing these YouTube videos. Nobody listens to their shit because they're not flexible. You have to be flexible. You have to be like, you know what? I was wrong. 5 years ago, I said this. I was wrong. I've learned.
Yeah. I've
I'm,
become that person, Steve. I've actually
yeah.
said to you,
So let
I used to
me,
be,
yeah,
yeah, go on. I used to be fixed on the idea that if you start a cycle, that's the cycle you did to the finish. And Steve and I did a show where we literally discussed, if the cycle's not working, why the fuck can't you change it? And I'm like, hang on, what the fuck? And by the end of the show, I was like, what a fucking course. Why wasn't I thinking like that before? I literally changed my thought process, because if we wouldn't have given out the best information to someone, why would they make them stay on a 12 or 16-week cycle? That's not fucking working for them. I've been lucky what I've done when I've stuck with it, but it doesn't mean every person does. And what happens in life, shit comes along. So of course you need to be flexible, and this is how you can change it. But I didn't think like that at all. So I've literally changed because of these shows. Carry on, Steve.
yeah. So look, there's an example of this, like the bro science. If you pick up a bodybuilding magazine and from the 80s, and you see the people who are writing, most of it is garbage. Okay. Even and in the magazines today, whenever I'm traveling on a plane, which I haven't traveled in years, but when I travel, I might pick up a bodybuilding magazine and just go through it. It's all bullshit. And they might have like they'll throw in like a workout split here and there to make it seem legit. But a lot of the
Yeah.
shit that they put in there is a bunch of bullshit. And look, at the end of the day, you know, it's it's one of those things where these guys, they're saying a lot of stuff. Like example, they used to think, okay, you got to get 500 grams of protein in a day. You don't. You don't. Mobster and I don't get 500 grams of protein in a day. Pro bodybuilders don't even get that much in a day. All
No.
right.
I don't know if you and I get 500 grams between us, Steve.
Yeah. And then look, another thing too. Oh, you can run a small amount of oral steroids as a bridge. I just saw someone post that thread on there. And that's
Yeah,
that it's
come
not
on. Of
suppressive. It is suppressive. Again, we can
course
get,
it
but in
is.
the 80s, you couldn't get blood work done to prove or disprove that. So people would say something like that and get away with it without any, but now we can get blood work. You can, if you think you can run 10 milligrams of Debo a day for 6 weeks and not get suppressive, then do it. Prove it to me. I want you
Yeah,
to do it. You'll see in your blood work that your LH and FSH takes a nosedive. That means you're getting suppressed. That means your pituitary glands are not creating hormones on their own anymore. So no, that's not true. Another one, you always have to run testosterone cycle as a base. You don't, but most people think you do because it's been
yeah,
parroted. Another thing, oh, quality of food doesn't matter. It does. What that what,
absolutely.
what that chicken ate will absolutely make a difference in your body. If a chicken is fed garbage crap, which is most of what we have in America because of our corporate farms, or that fish is farmed and it's fed an unnatural diet, or that
Oh,
cow is
gosh.
fed grain, it's grain finished, it absolutely has less nutrition and is more bad for you. Chicken breast, for example, a lot of people don't know this, the poor quality chicken breast, which is what you would find at any supermarket in America, unless you're going to a good quality health food store. But the
Yeah.
low quality chicken breast is going to have 70% polyunsaturated fat, which clogs out the outer linings of your arteries to your heart. So what happens is later in life, once you get into your 40s, we're seeing more and more Americans getting heart attacks in their 40s now. But in your 50s and 60s, for sure, what's going to happen is you're going to have to go in and get that cleaned out. Or what's going to happen is that is going to fuck up your artery. And you're going to end up with a stroke or a heart attack because of all that polyunsaturated fat, which is full in that chicken breast. And then they add refined oils on top of it, will make it even worse. So your food quality absolutely matters. A lot of people think, well, chicken breast, low quality chicken breast, fried and refined oils, that's no different than good quality chicken breast where the chicken was actually pasture raised, ran around outside. Same thing with eggs, same thing with beef, same thing with all this. It makes a difference. We know that now, but we didn't know that in the 80s. Another thing that I hear a lot, Tren and EQ are vet steroids. No, they're not. They were human grade, pharmacy grade for years
Yep. To begin with,
before
yeah.
equipoise boldenone was prescribed for 20 or 25 years as human grade to help with anemia and muscle wasting. Tren was pharmacy grade. Negma out of France produced something called parabolin for years, and then they stopped producing it because they didn't want the heat basically on them. So no, they're not vet steroids. Now they may be vet steroids, but they were historically not vet steroids. So again, that's something that we
Let me just use
that's what we
myself as
do.
an
That's what we
yeah,
do on this podcast. We give you the science, we give you the facts, and you make the
yeah,
determination of what to do from here. If you still want to go to Chick-fil-A and get low quality chicken full of refined seed oils and clog up your arteries, that's your business. But we're going to give you the facts and tell you that you shouldn't do that. You should get good quality chicken, cook it in your own, prep it properly without those seed oils, and you would avoid getting those polyunsaturated fats. So we're not gonna preach to you, but we're just gonna educate you. And what you do from
yeah,
there is
yeah.
up to you. Go ahead, Monster. Yeah.
Let me give you an example, and this is I think we've actually used this illustration on a previous show. I'm a huge fan, as regular listeners will know, of the history of our sport. Now I'm talking about the iron game in general. That's physical culture, weightlifting, bodybuilding, some degree of fitness, people using kettlebells, Indian clubs, everything. And my magazine and book collection goes back to 1900 or 1901, Steve. That's 123, 124 years. As an example, and a huge percentage of that is muscle magazines, bodybuilding magazines, probably something like 6,000 plus. Total of everything is probably 7,000, 8,000 items altogether. And I've actually literally physically met some of the writers, and I've seen the background on other writers and read some of the more historical books that have gone back over, including the whole bodybuilding magazine thing. Even now, people like John Romano was massively impactful in terms of the sheer volume of work that he did when Muscular Development was absolutely killing it back in the day. So let me give you an example of how sometimes it used to work. And this still applies to other shows in terms of putting information out there. Right, so one of my buddies that started the Muscle Mob magazine that I became involved in was Dave Gentle. And Dave Gentle was a very nice, easy to get along with fella. And for some period of time when he was absolutely killing it, Steve, back in the day, was probably writing for 3 or 4, certainly one on a regular basis, and the other 2 or 3 on an irregular basis, and including American magazines as well as British magazines. He wrote in the name of athletes, so in their name he was the person writing for them, as well as in his own name. And obviously, occasionally, Muscle Mag International with Bob Kennedy would pay him good money, $100 for an article. So the more fucking articles you write, the more you get paid. And of course, when that goes back into his own collection, we're paying the bills or whatever else. So the problem you had at some particular points in time is that some of the best writers in the industry were mediocre bodybuilders, mediocre weightlifters. And I say that, I mean, they went to the gym, they worked out, but they did not have 20-inch arms. They didn't have 60-inch chests. They wasn't benching 500 pounds. And yet they would write articles talking about those very things. If you do this arm routine right now, you might have 19-inch arms, and so on and so forth. Writing in the name of a pro bodybuilder because a pro bodybuilder can't string 3 words together, or we'll send them some notes on their workout, but that's kind of it, and you have to turn that into a 1,000-word article. And then even a thing that we talked about on I've actually mentioned this on the forum, Steve, where some people like to change their routine every month, and that literally came from, and you can still see this with men's fitness. Great abs for the summer. The best ab workout you've ever done in 6 minutes. That kind of headline that grabs your attention on the front page of fitness magazines, but again, bodybuilding magazines back in the day. So the reason why some people just change their arm routine every 4 weeks is because that's when the next issue of the magazine came out. There was no psychological reason. If the arm routine worked and was still working, keep fucking doing it until it stops fucking working. The only reason you're otherwise changing it is for mental stimulation. Literally, progress is everything. If you're a bodybuilder and your muscles are getting a better shape, a better peak to your biceps, the top of that chest is being filled in, don't stop doing what you're doing. Do that very thing until it stops working. Or, as per the articles, as per what Steve and I might do when it comes to PEDs, when it comes to exercise, let us suggest a few exercises that are going to fill in that space. But it could do that for 6 weeks, 12 weeks, the whole fucking year. It only used to change back in the day, Steve, because of the influence of the magazines. And the influence of the magazines was coming from writers who were at best mediocre bodybuilders. as often as not. I've actually, like I said, physically met some of these people. Great people, nice to have a beer with, award dinners and all this kind of stuff, Steve. But they never won a competition. They weren't out there kicking ass in the Mr. Universe or the Mr. Olympia. Very, very rare. There has been maybe a handful. Frank Richards doing incredibly well in Mr. Britain, Reg Park, etc. Occasionally writing, not a great writer, but occasionally writing as a Mr. Universe. Some of the top Mr. Olympias are kind of good now because they've become better over time at doing the social media and putting information out there. But in actual writing, not necessarily that good. They quite often have to work with someone else to put this stuff out. So there's an element of the reasons why certain things were said. Something else I've said on this show, Steve, is not everything that you and I talk about is quote unquote sexy. It is practical, it works, but it doesn't always grab the attention or get the traction. It is the truth versus some sort of juicy version of the truth. And the truth of the matter is, in a lot of things that we do outside of the gym, when it comes to social media, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, and whatever else, the things that make us go, what the fuck is this motherfucker talking about? I'm going to let them know. It's clickbait. It is AI generated stuff now, Steve, that makes you want to reply. I've just seen 4 versions of the same post on some. What the fuck? Why is it exactly the same words? It's clickbait, and it's always going to be some kind of baity. Woman with 16 kids by 16 fathers wants to get herself a 6-figure man. Well, don't we all, darling? You know what I mean? Another 6-figure woman. But you've got 16 kids by 6. Well, what the fuck am I getting into? So there's just stuff like that. And that's the reasons why certain shows do those things, because it gets traction and hits, but it's not necessarily educational. Aims for the future, Steve. Right. So the obvious thing is to improve. Every single show that we do, especially 2 or 3 shows together over a week or whatever else, there's been shows when I said to Steve on the show earlier on, in fact, to you, the listener, I've said, we could have done that a little bit better. We could have talked more about this particular thing. And we take that energy, we take that thought, and we put it into the next show. So we go, right, are there shows that we can do in the future which are more inspiring, more educational? Is there information that we can add to? Can we do more shows on peptides? Can we do more shows on SARMs? We know that people like to hear about anabolic steroids. We know that they like to hear about this. But could we put some of this information in there? Is there something that we need to learn to expand our knowledge that we can then pass on to you, the listener? Absolutely. Are there elements of the show where we become more professional in terms of just how we speak? For example, I get constantly told this, Steve knows this, because I can talk the hind legs of a donkey, sometimes as we're doing these shows, I start to get a little tiny, and I mean a tiny fraction, excited, Steve. And so when I do that, I talk faster. And our American listeners are like, slow the fuck down, motherfucker. We're loving what you're saying, but I can't make out. I'll have to think about what you just said, and you're already on to the next sentence. So I pause. So I'll hold back. I even half a second. No, try not to have any gaps, but half a second to give the listener a chance to catch up, and then move on to the next subject or the next sentence or the next bit of pieces. And that element of professionalism needs to come across. So we want better information, more timeless information, more little bits of research that Steve and I can go away and do. Time to do the research. There's other things that go on. Time to do the research. Making sure that we're ready before we do a show to talk about a particular subject. I can do some subjects cold, but other times I will need to sit down and spend a few minutes a day before, half an hour there, just bringing myself back up to speed, just reminding myself about bits and pieces of information and having that come across in a certain particular way. As an example, I think it was discussed on the forums the other day where someone said, oh, you can't see the next person that's going to develop products come along. And I pointed out that peptides and SARMs have become more popular in the last 5 or 10 years than they ever were before. So there's an absolute new growth potential for that side of the industry. So what will happen is Steve and I will do shows on those new growth potential type things. There will be new things that come along, changes to the way that Steve and I perceive certain pieces of information. I've already said that I've changed my mind on things that I'd have been stuck on before, and I've changed my mind on. I've heard shows that other people didn't do that, and you say the combination of things. For example, in the Steve, I can see, especially with the blood test becoming more sophisticated, and so we will probably be able to, at some point in the future, give very specific guidance to certain individuals using computer programs that we've never been able to do before, because that information will become available. Steve and I have almost got to worry about competition with AI generated type shows that might come along. And as Steve said, parrot information based on what they read on the internet, but not understand how to interpret that information. That's something Steve and I do. And so that kind of stuff, understanding the motivations of individuals and being able to explain those things to you, and we will get better at that. So what do you think about aims for the future again? Stuff that we think is going to come along and how
Yeah.
we could maybe put that across better.
Yeah, so what you talked about earlier, you made a good point about all your books and stuff. So, those bodybuilding books, that's a wealth of information that but the thing is when they were putting out those books, it wasn't about necessarily, let's do clickbait and let's get as many books sold as possible. A lot of it was good information. And my original way that I learned was through those books. And that's what we had access to back in those days. Now with the internet, we have lots of information. It's called TMI. It's too much information. It's like when you go on a date and the girl she starts ranting and raving about her ex-boyfriend and how, he did this, and then nobody wants to hear
Yeah.
that. And vice
No.
versa. If you're ever out with you're on a date, you don't talk about your exes on a first date. Nobody wants to hear that shit.
People
It's
don't retain it, Steve, because the information has become available. People don't have to physically retain the information. They're almost relying on people like you and I because they can go back and listen to our show again because they've got other stuff and stimulation and things going
yeah.
on. So they
But
don't have to retain it. Yeah.
But out there's so much clickbait and information out there, and what it ends up doing is it clouds
Yes.
everything, and people get even more confused. And we see this on purpose. A lot of them put out misinformation on purpose. And I'm not a conspiracy person at all. It has nothing to do with conspiracies. But let's say nutritional information. Why do they put out bad nutritional information? Because they want to confuse you. A lot of these people out there, they're in the food industry themselves. They're dependent on you buying these poor quality foods. So they want to put out, food companies are very clever with marketing. They want to put out misinformation. They want to confuse you. They want you to think that Subway is a healthy place to get food, because that's their marketing. They spend billions trying to convince you of this. So it's the same thing with this information out there. And a lot of them out there, a lot of these people out there, they don't know shit about this stuff. So what they'll do is they'll put out clickbait videos to try to get views and build up their channel, and then just put out crap. And they don't care that they're putting out crap. They want the views because then they get more sponsors and stuff like that. So that's not what our future of this podcast is about. We're never going to be a place where we're just trying to monetize our videos and get clicks. We're a place that we're going to spread information and we're going to help you get the most out of your cycles.
Yeah.
And we're going to help you get the most out of what you're capable of doing, no matter what your genetics are, whether you're average genetics, bad genetics, good genetics, great genetics. You do the best that you're capable of doing, and we're going to help you get there. We're going to get your diet on point. We're going to get your training on point. We're going to get your steroid cycles on point and get you the best results that you can possibly get and save you the headaches of having problems. And that's why I talked about earlier the blood work video that we did. Which podcasts out there sit there and talk about blood work? None. Because blood work doesn't get clicks. Nobody wants to hear about blood work. But we put it out there so you can use that as a reference so that when you do go and get your blood work done, and you can look at it and identify any red flags that are going on, and that can literally save your life. Yeah, my red blood cell count, my hematocrit is running hot, or my AST, my LT is running hot. What the fuck does that even mean? And we put out these podcasts so you can listen to these podcasts and you can know, yeah, AST, LT is high. That means my liver is putting out too many enzymes, and too many enzymes are coming out and my liver is not functioning the way it should. I should probably come off my cycle, or I should probably take more time between my cycles to get my liver values back in line. I should take some liver support to help my liver out. I should cleanse a little bit. I should fast a little bit to get that number better. My red blood cell count, hematocrit is bad. I should come off the gear. I should lower my TRT dose. I should go donate blood. These are simple things that you can do to correct these issues. But if you let these conditions continue, you're going to have problems. But that's what we try to do on this podcast, is educate you, but not preach to you. So that's the aim in the future. And I think that
we've
overall,
made mistakes in training. We've made mistakes in nutrition. We've made mistakes with PEDs. We've had PEDs that didn't work because they were fake and so on and so forth. We've learned some of the lessons that we try to teach you. We've changed our opinions on certain things. And I think one of the small advantages that Steve and I had is that sometimes we come across as in we are in the fucking trenches with you, and we want to give you that solid factual information that's based on those mistakes that we've made, the lessons that we learned, and the fact that we've had to go away, like I said, even from us re-educated, understanding, how confusing blood work can be to begin with when you're looking at it, and what do these numbers mean, and is it appropriate to me, Steve? Oh, is that because I'm on cycle? And so on and so forth. And then over time, because Steve's seen thousands, because I've seen plenty, I start to get, oh, no, that's only on cycle, don't panic. So you feel on cycle and so on and so forth. So we start to learn these things for ourselves, and it makes it that much easier to tell you just based on our sheer experience. The last thing I want to talk about, Steve, just as we go into the finish, is the reason why we're able to do these shows is because of sponsors. The reason why the sponsors support us in these shows is because of you, the listener. If you didn't listen, the sponsors wouldn't sponsor any of the shows we do, never mind this particular one, Hardcore 2.0. We wouldn't have made it to 100. So we appreciate, absolutely fucking appreciate, and thank you for listening, and thank the sponsors for sponsoring and allowing us the time and the energy, the fun sometimes, the education, the preachy kind of sometimes, whatever the hell it is, the magic formula, the combination of those particular factors, the fact that some people will listen to these on a regular basis when they're doing cardio, when they're driving to the gym, because they like how we talk, because of just sometimes literally the energy that we're putting out when we're talking about a subject, because sometimes of the quote unquote gossipy type stuff when we're talking about pro level things and the things that juicy crazy that motherfucker's going to do, because we might tune into that little semblance of energy that you, the listener, like to have when you get to the gym and you got your head on, you're ready to rock and roll. And if the podcast gets the support of sponsors because of that, because of you, the listener, then we thank both the sponsors and the listeners for their support. We don't get to make it to 100 of episodes here, or 600 somewhere else, or 150 on another show, or whatever, without that energy, without that support, without those listeners across the multiple platforms that we're on. So absolutely, Steve, we got to show our appreciation to you, listen to, and to the sponsors for that particular reason. Fingers crossed that we do another 100 or 200 coming from this point forward, Steve, and I look forward to that particular future. Please note, we are not doctors, and the opinions are ours. It is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.